lower.
Yeah, if you look at adopted police and fire, it might be different.
Yeah, it is, it's actually lower, so.
But the
Anyway.
other thing is that, the police department consists of a number of different divisions. We could bring back a kind of further breakdown by division, so you can get some sense of, where the pluses and minuses are. And also, there's a variety of different funds that are included. So it's not all general fund, it's grant funds.
No, I understand that, but I'm
Narcotic
just kind of
funds.
looking at overall
Right.
costs. I understand it's
Yeah,
not all
it's a fair
general.
question, and we can get you some more information.
Right.
Yeah. So in
and-
case of, case of fire, the adopted is 16 million. So yeah, so, okay. Well, again, these are estimates, and we probably ought to take a look at it. Looks like they're going back to their original proposed adoption. But we
Okay.
can get you some more information.
Okay, and, let's see, I had, a few other issues or questions with this. On the police, on the, fire administration, if you just look at, the personnel increase, and this is just for, the fire administration is just 2 people. So the increase is, 58,000 just for the two people. It just seems like is that really all just PERS related, PERS related costs there?
PERS and OPEB, yeah. Yep.
And then medical insurance, sometimes, I don't know if it's the case here, sometimes medical insurance, because we have open enrollment and the choices change on what medical coverage, sometimes that comes into play as well.
Yeah, and on the medical insurance changes, I was looking at your, your notations. Under the city clerk, it's noted that the cost, actually the changes resulted in a decrease in cost, and then in the infotech, it was an increase in cost. So I was just trying to understand why, and in some other ones, it was like increased costs. I was just trying to understand why the one department, these changes resulted in a decrease in costs, and the other ones are being noted that it's actually an increase in cost.
Just open enrollment choices.
Okay, all right, so they have different open enrollment choices, okay. All right, and then, okay, and then on the city attorney, just back on their, looking at their, I was looking at the, under maintenance and operations expense, I pulled the detail, not by department, but detail of the type of expenses under M&O. And, the attorney fees are of course, one of the largest expenses out of that line item. What other expenses are like in there? Because that's about 382,000. It looks like out of the line item, the attorney fees were 382,000 for maintenance and operations. So then you're looking at another, almost 400,000, another 328,000. What else is, almost 400,000? What else is driving there? Is that the, is that other, what, are they doing other outside contracting labor other than attorney fees, or what else is in that?
Without seeing that document, it's hard for me to say, but I do know that most of their M&O budget is in the form of contract services. But we can look at that.
Okay, so it's they're also other than outside attorneys, are using other outside contract services as well.
And again, not sure what exactly is being compared. The city attorney has attorney fees in more than just the general fund, if that comes into play.
So
Right.
if you ran that report general fund only, you might be
okay.
missing some of the expenses.
There's
to
other
other
attorney
funds.
fees on top of this 380, okay. The 382 that's in the M&O and the general fund is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, this is a full roll-up for the department here, all funds.
Right, I understand. Okay. So in reality, the outside attorney fees could be like, do we have any way of seeing the full measure of how much we're spending on outside attorney fees?
Well, it's sure. We'd probably have to do some mining of data,
Yeah.
for a full year, but
Right.
the warrants are out there. I mean, but they're primarily in a handful of categories. The internal service fund, as we said, workers' compensation litigation expenses. There's going to be general liability litigation expenses. There's going to be general liability in ISF pre-litigation, sort of litigation prevention expenses. And then you're going to have your general counsel for, assistance in writing municipal code updates, policies, procedures, et cetera. So you have to sort of aggregate all that to get a full handle on external professional costs. And unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier, the workers' compensation side of that's going to be a little difficult to track given the nature of
Okay.
some of it being proprietary.
On the attorney's fees, we have reimbursement agreements with certain folks that we're working
We
with.
do.
How is that reflected in this, in that M&O? Are the reimbursements we're receiving reflected in there, or are they accounted for, journaled somewhere else?
You might, as an example, reflect some of the change. The mid-year number might see a one-time increase that might reflect that reimbursement agreement and might drop off on a core budget basis. But that might be where you see it. Sometimes it's a project-based expense. It depends on the case. So,
Okay. All right, and then, okay, let's see what else I had, sorry. I think, so in general, how can we facilitate, these questions? 'Cause I don't want to take up, everyone's, I just wanted to kind of point out those issues, and I was just looking at, in with comparing the actual costs with like the budget, it just seems that we have, as you said, there is some vacant positions. It looks like there's probably vacant positions, and the reason why I'm saying this is just, if we can somehow identify it, looking at some other vacancies for possible decommissioning or whatnot to try to hold a handle better on our budget. I was looking at, where was that?
I think commissioners, what we can do
Yeah.
is,
Get our list of our questions.
yeah, well,
like,
I think in general, for these in particular, right, fire, police, and attorney, we can perhaps get finer details going forward. And then perhaps, as staff suggested, maybe, depending upon the availability, have one of the heads, whether it's the city attorney, chief of police, or fire chief, come and address those issues per their time available at a future meeting.
Yeah, I think
That would probably go with our item number 9, member items. We can,
And if you're open to it, the other thing I might add is that, in order for us to be prepared and to be effective in our answers to you, if you have questions, in advance of your next meeting, it would be helpful for us to get those questions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Maybe, instead of taking up the time here, I can, or all of us could maybe put our questions, our more detailed questions together, and we should just forward them to Marnie for some,
Sure,
for some.
That's certainly an option. If it's a question that you have that you just want to get the answer to,
Yeah.
you can reach out to Marnie, Mike, or me. If it's something that you really want to, ask in a public forum,
Right.
you can still do that.
At the
but-
next meeting, right?
At the next
Right,
meeting,
exactly.
but, my request would be, if, in order for this not to be a game of gotcha, which I
Yeah.
don't feel like
No,
it
no,
is,
no.
but, we want to be able to answer your questions and make
Yeah,
good use of your
that's been a
time.
struggle with this commission for the whole time I've been on here, is like how, I know we can only you know, ask questions and talk with each other
Sure,
in this
in a
public
meeting, right.
forum, you know, so it's very limited for us to get our, you know, my comments and things in front of these guys, you know, but yet I don't want to take up everyone's time in asking all these detailed questions. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I think that would be helpful if we could, you know, direct these more detailed questions to Marnie. We can maybe, hopefully, I mean, I don't want to inundate her with, you know, with work and trying to get those, but it would be great if we could have some kind of,
She loves these kind of questions.
some kind of, you know, information for, you know, for the next meeting and such, because I understand, I mean, I'm not sure what we're supposed to be doing, because I see on the budget response requests that the council is asking for our recommendations. So I'm assuming that at the end of this meeting, since that's supposed to be like in their hands before our next meeting, we should probably, I would assume we've got to end this meeting with coming up with a few recommendations for them. Am I correct?
Well, I think we have recommendations, and then we still have a lot of questions, so
Right,
there's
I know, and
got to
that's the
balance
issue.
the
That's-
two.
Ask an order of operation, so just timing-wise as well. Our next meeting is devoted to the budget as well. So,
Right.
so what are we supposed, what is our goal to accomplish tonight, and what rolls over to the next meeting? And what if we don't do it tonight, is not going to get done?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, here's the calendar. So we have strategically placed your next meeting in advance of budget adoption with this in mind. The purpose for the two-step approach, this is the first time the commission's had the opportunity to talk about the budget at 2 meetings and have it in as far advance notice as you've had. The goal is for you to flush out questions tonight, help us formulate some responses for you, whether it's a future one-on-one meeting, if you want to really do a deep dive, or if you want to have the more full group discussion at the next meeting and go through them, we can. But I think at the end, the outcome of your June 14th meeting should be a letter, much like you helped craft when we submitted it as part of the input process through mid-year. So you're really trying to prepare a letter, and I think we all kind of worked through that, and you helped, we sort of wordsmithed it here at the dais, that would ultimately be transmitted. So while the minutes from the June 14th meeting would be a bit of a rush to get to council for the 19th, the minutes from this meeting will be available, and then your letter of recommendations, I think we want to craft on the 14th.
And in the same way, there's a need for this commission to receive and file this proposed budget. Does that have to take place tonight, or does that take place on June 14th?
Well,
Which is
I mean,
late.
receive and file is a ministerial act. You're just accepting the materials that are presented to you. It's the proposed budget. You're not adopting the budget.
Endorsing
No, I
it.
understand.
You're not endorsing it.
But we received and filed our calendar at one point, and then found out it was completely wrong, and it was going to take something, active legislation to get it changed. So I'm just trying to understand the order of operation.
Yeah, I think your deliverable, if you will, is a letter from this group at the end of your June 14th meeting that we would transmit to council as part of their consideration for budget adoption on the 19th.
That'll also be after the council's had 2 meetings on the budget.
Yeah, that's my issue that I kind
And-
of have, because I was wondering if we shouldn't have some recommendations to them from this meeting. I mean, I don't know if that's possible. That's was my concern.
Well,
Let's knock out I would think that, let's knock out the questions that all of us have. And then I think that each of us would maybe have
A few
one or
recommendations.
2 items, and there's likely to be some crossover amongst those 1 or 2 items. Maybe not a formal letter coming from us like the chair did last time, but some suggestions for consideration.
Right, so we will have some questions, and I think we already have some high-level questions or discussions regarding fire, police, and city attorneys regarding,
Variance.
basically, we would like a little bit more information regarding the variances and finer details on the budget. So,
I have just one comment or question. It would, have we ever given or received the council or this commission or anything like a top-level 5-year forecast on revenue, on where, if we take where we are now based on our current development plans, like because it's kind of like when we're reviewing these budgets and looking at these costs, it would be nice to kind of see where we are heading, a few years out into the revenues.
Yeah, we used to do, as a budget response report, a 3- and 5-year forecast, kind of best case, probable case, worst case scenario for expenses and revenues. We got away from that a little bit in the sort of immediate recession and post-recessionary world because, things were so cataclysmic. But, that could be a suggestion you could make. It candidly might be a difficult deliverable for council for this budget cycle.
Just thinking for the future.
But for the
right?
future, certainly.
I think that would really help us in, on top-level revenue and expenses to really understand, when we're reviewing each year, where we're going to be heading into the future. And I had one question about the CIP. It was just, this is just a quick, on the Tidelands capital, Tidelands capital funding was at $870K, and then I just saw 2 projects for that, for the pier restrooms and the harbor patrol docks, and they're adding up to $870, and I was wondering where the other 200 was going. The funding was $870 under the Tidelands capital, but then those 2 projects that were outlined for them was only adding up to the $670. That was just a quick one, and I'm done.
We have 3. There is pier deck and piling structure repairs of $200,000.
Okay.
Pier restroom improvements of $130,000, and replacement of the harbor patrol docks of $540,000 for a total of $870,000.
Okay, I didn't see that other 200K.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Morocco.
So mine's related to the police. Do you want me to hold off for now?
I think you haven't had the floor yet.
You
Yeah,
should have
go
the
for
floor.
Okay, so going back to Commissioner Sample's point earlier about like overtime, spec ops, and just added costs, have we ever considered or looked into the idea of contracting out some or all of the police service to, say, LA Sheriff's Department? I know Rancho Cucamonga does that with San Bernardino County, and it looks like decision package 26 seems to be an RFP for the same thing with the fire department.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we've ever explored that.
Yeah, no, the answer in my history here is no. We haven't done that. We haven't been directed to pursue that. And maybe just from a characterization standpoint of the fire, it wouldn't so much be an RFP, it would be it's a cost analysis from the county fire department as to delivering services in the community. It wouldn't be like we'd be putting it out to bid. It would be to determine what the county would project it cost to deliver similar services in our city. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know for the police, there'd probably be some added, like social and political impact too, as well.
Sure. I mean, it's a loaded, any of these studies are loaded discussions. Yeah, to say the least.
Along the same lines, I know it's been discussed several times in the past, and part of the decision package has to do with a change in staffing in the dispatch center. Has there been any reconsideration of moving dispatch over to South Bay Regional Communications?
Yeah, we have been in communication with the RCC staff. They have a new executive director. We did send the letter based on council direction, basically inviting them to enter into discussions with us to determine the cost, the feasibility, about our potential migration of our dispatch services there. So that's a work in progress. That work will take place over the course of the next several months. But yeah, that was a significant milestone that we did kind of invite them to enter into discussions with us, and so that will happen shortly.
Is there any target for getting that done?
It's going to, in large part, kind of depend on their staff availability as well as our staff availability. So, we anticipate that it's something that we would get to before the end of this calendar year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. These will be quick. For the sales tax estimates, is that factored for inflation, or is that just based on current?
Does HDO provides us those figures?
Factored for inflation.
Factored for inflation.
On the TIBID, the bid, that the money was encumbered for a bid, $150,000, but not allocated. Is that a carryover? Where is that reflected in the budget?
Yeah, it would be it's currently in an M&O account now. If we haven't expend all those funds by the end of the fiscal year, it would be carried over in the next fiscal year to complete the contract obligations with the groups.
Do we have a target for when that encumbered money would be allocated and whether or not we could maybe back it out for all or part of it? I wouldn't say all of it, but part of it, because we contracted it out.
I think their work is going to, and in fact, I don't believe the consulting services contract spending all of that 150,000 for one.
50,000.
Yeah, it was 50,000. So the resources that are there would be part of our year-end carryover conversations, whether or not they'd be carried further. I mean, if we needed them to
Probably
balance.
adjusted in mid-year. If it wasn't allocated and it was still there, maybe adjusted in.
Actually, year-end, I think you'd make that decision, the council would make that decision at year-end.
Okay,
Which would
so
be November.
That might be one of the things that we would recommend to visit, say if this is encumbered but not allocated by X date, a portion of it could be allocated in a different way.
Right.
Okay. The parking meter revenue, is that a net number, that less our charges, or is that gross?
It's a gross number, and then, then there are expenses associated with that collection.
Before I forget to say this, I think I'll speak for everybody here. We never want to come up with a gotcha question. That's never our intention, or never my intention. I would think it's never anybody's intention. Good. Last year, I saw an item in there for increasing the parking fees in the waterfront and the surface lot. Is that something that was talked about last year and it didn't end up getting done, or is this an increase on top of that?
I believe this will address that. I think the recommendations in this year's budget or decision package would address consistency across the waterfront.
Okay. And
I will confirm that with our waterfront director, but I believe that's the case.
The treasurer's budget is something that we talked about one time before, where in 2015 it was $150,000, and then the M&O was, and now it's going to be projected at $410,000, and the maintenance and ops is $60,000. That was $60,000, now maintenance and ops is $155,000. So I recognize from a personnel standpoint why that number would change, but why would the maintenance and ops triple? From 2015, where it was 60,900, to projected 18-19, where it's 155,000.
The biggest change in that line has been the internal audit.
Meaning the contract for the internal audit?
Contract for the internal audit. It was a decision package, I can't remember which year. It wasn't 17-18, so maybe 16-17.
Okay.
And then at mid-year 17-18, instead of, because as it turns out, that internal audit affects more departments than just the treasurer. It's been split among a few departments.
Is that the Moss Adams report?
Yes, and it's a multi-department effort, and it's why the actual projected expense is not there yet is because that getting everybody coordinated and executing that's lagged a bit. So compared to budget, it's down year over year. But
Understood.
actual
I
expense is
recognize why the
delayed.
personnel would have changed and why that would be, but not the maintenance and ops.
When do we expect to see that report? Because I would say it's 3 years ago that we contracted with them.
Well, there have been some reports. There's different phases of that effort. Some had to do with just general accounting, some had to do with general oversight, and then there were some more specific, I believe, efforts that are related to duties and things of that nature. I think that's the portion of the study that's lagging at this point.
So just as a reminder, I think that we've asked to know what the scope of what their audits are going to be a number of times and to hear their report. And I don't think we've ever seen the areas that they have chosen for an internal audit, or they've been directed to do the internal audit, or the audit reports themselves. So I think that's something we'd be interested in seeing, at least not in great detail, but at some level.
Sure, I think once it's complete, those results would be, certainly. We have an audit committee would review them. I'm sure your commission would see those findings as well.
Okay, so for me, from 30,000 feet, my suggestions or ideas would be that the additional $50,000 for the Artesia Boulevard Improvement Project is a luxury right now on a non-luxury budget. until at least we see some performance in the money that we've already invested, or some sort of proof of concept that we're not just continuing to spend money and picking numbers without regard for seeing that. And then for other encumbered funds that we have out there, like for the TBID, which I think is a really very valuable thing that we're creating, and I'm really enthusiastic about it. But if there are unencumbered figures there beyond what our current contract responsibilities are, that perhaps that would go into a reserve rather than having zero in reserves. And I think, because the idea that we're borrowing out from the CalPERS and we use that is not a great, I know it's a policy thing for the council, and it was a little controversial, but not using that as an example, things like that.
The timing of those savings, though, really are, that's a year-end initiative. So we could, I mean, I think noted, your recommendation would be not to carry those funds over, basically allow them to go back into fund balance and then be reappropriated if necessary.
Right,
But
if and
that-
when.
Yeah, that may not, the timing of that won't work with the
But
budget
the
appropriation.
Artesia Boulevard part of it is
That would-
a
that
decision
would.
package. Okay, so that would be two things that I would like to address.
So could you please clarify what TBDIE?
So well, we had a contract, and I don't want to, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and
Sure, go ahead.
express it. We had a contract with the Visitors Bureau where they received a portion of the transit occupancy tax each
Right,
year
right.
for marketing the city. In lieu of that, the city council decided to not continue that practice, but to go create a tourism business improvement district. That's going to be comprised of the hoteliers and some other folks. And we have a consultant that's working on creating that tourism business improvement district to market the city. $150,000 was allocated, is that right, Joe?
Correct.
Mike? $150,000 was allocated for the creation of that group. And a consultant was hired at a cost of $50,000.
Maybe a little more than
Maybe
that.
a little bit more, around $50,000 then, to go forward and put together the logistics of creating that group. And I'm sure that there's a report that's coming.
Yeah, it's coming
down the
along
line.
quite well. I think we're going to see that in the next couple of months.
But that's the nuts and bolts of it.
And that's the 50K increase in under 44.
No, that's
Oh,
different.
no, that's a separate
Yeah, that-
item.
Oh, okay.
50,000 under 44 is the Artesia Boulevard improvement.
Right, and you said that we should take that out because we don't know about the.
We don't have proof of concept in it.
Yeah, right.
We've certainly, it's a great program, and we want to improve the Artesia Boulevard corridor, but can we afford to buy imported beer on a domestic beer budget? You
No,
know,
I understand. And where is the business improvement district? Is that, that's in the core budget?
Yeah, that's not I don't think that's of consideration for now. In terms of recommendations for year-end discussions, that
Right.
would be
and
germane to
it's
that.
more things like that,
Right.
rather than that specifically.
Right.
It was just
Right.
something I was using as an example.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further comments?
Oh, as far as, what about the costs on the fire department uniforms? Is that something that is really, absolutely, that's another, on number 24?
Yeah, as we hire new employees, there's a requirement to outfit them. You
Okay.
can't just
Oh, okay, all
Yeah.
right, okay.
use the old uniforms.
Okay, so that's for the new.
And it's
for the
not
new
just
hires.
uniforms, it's turnout gear, it's, breathing apparatus, things like that.
Oh, okay, all right, so that's for the new hires, I understand. Okay.
Commissioner Esser, anything more?
I have recommendations but they're just things that, I would like us to looking specifically at this fiscal year budget. My recommendations are more, things that we should explore and take a look at with mid-year and into the future. So, my only comment about this year budget is, and I'm just looking top of the line, I just have an issue with us constantly having a deficit. I mean, if our revenue is only increasing 1.9 million, I really think we need to hold the budget to that increase, and our budget's going up 2.2 million. So that I feel that should be kind of a practice that we look at, like Commissioner Solomon was saying, that we have to not always be filling the void with the CalPERS reserve and things. I think we need to, if I were to come up with a recommendation, that would be my recommendation, that we somehow look into this core budget and find a savings of 300,000 in there
Okay.
to match the revenue increase.
Commissioner Johnson.
So if we're summarizing our 30,000-foot level, I would echo some of Commissioner Esser's comments about if we have a forward-looking revenue plan, because I think that's important to get back to my initial 30,000-foot look about, the gigantic elephants in the budget, and also echoing her comments about the variances that maybe we could hear about next time on the police, fire, and legal. And then to drill down a little bit of a counterpoint is that, judging by appearances, I don't know that we're doing enough on the Artesia corridor, and I hate to see that area deteriorate further. I patronize a lot of businesses on that strip, and, I think it's got to be tough for them. I see, there's some community efforts going on there from time to time. The local businesses are having events and things. So in the numbers we're talking about, I don't have an objection to the $50,000. And when I say what, personally speaking, I would like to see more emphasis on, can we please make the thing look better? I think, if, I don't want to say something as tacky as if you build it, they will come, but, we can't have that just dirt median. It's not looking like Redondo Beach to me, so.
Well, that's in transition. We're
Yeah,
doing
I realize
improvements.
that.
So, yeah,
I'm
it was
waiting
better
to see the
before.
outcome.
It's sort of gotten worse, but we're going to put in place drought tolerant landscaping, and, that was a significant set aside of funds for that. Just one thing on the subject of the storefront program. We do have a working group that was appointed to look at recommendations for Artesia. They've had a number of meetings. One of the meetings focused on the storefront improvement program. They had great interest in that program. So the one group that has kind of looked specifically at Artesia, sees great promise in the storefront improvement program. So if that's, just a different perspective that you might want to consider.
And I think, that's very important, because I can't believe some of these small businesses wouldn't want to make a small investment to, as part of that, to improve the general appearance of the storefronts on the street.
Yeah, and that's the goal of all the efforts, whether it's the landscape project, streetscape improvement project, the right-of-way that was referenced earlier, the improvements north and south of Artesia, and the storefront improvements. We're just trying to kickstart the beautification process up there to hopefully energize the corridor.
A tiny bit of paint, a tiny bit of fixing up of dilapidated signs would make it look like it's not, on the verge of being a deserted strip.
Well, they spent the $100,000 from last year, and then there's $500,000 that's going into the right-of-way along the bike path. And there's a $200,000 study for how to improve the Artesia corridor. So if we're gonna spend $200,000 on studying how to improve the corridor, maybe we wait for that report to come back, tell us how to improve it, instead of guessing how to improve it, is my theory.
Point taken, and always difficult to measure ROI on something
Right.
like that.
And just out of fairness, it's 800K on the SCE right away, not 500.
Oh, it's 800,000, okay. Am I right about the study? Was that $200,000?
The targeted revitalization study, it was in that ballpark, yeah.
So what, if that report, I could see, it's a fair point. It's very hard to measure ROI on that, and I appreciate that. What I'm suggesting is the idea that if we're gonna spend a lot of money on a consultant to tell us what to do there, why are we spending money without knowing what to do there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point. I mean, you could say, look, wait for the plan. Maybe your motion is delay that investment to hear what the targeted revitalization says.
$50,000 towards a consultant's recommendation.
Right. And I think the other side of that would be that study is going to be more about land use and, broader issues. It may not be just storefront beautification, but no, I think it's a fair point. Should we wait and see?
I think to add to what Mike's saying, the study is really looking more long-term, looking how, the land uses that are out there, the mixes, the uses. The storefront program is like, what can we do right now? Sort of like a more immediate type initiative, so.
Seems very duplicative then, because that's what we're doing on the GPAC.
Well,
You will
you all be
rolled in as
involved.
part of the
Yeah.
GPAC process.
Yeah, that's going to flow through the GPAC.
Yeah, you rely upon experts to give you their input, and you spend the money on what they recommend. If that's not part of it, how to improve. So if the idea is for the study is to simply for planning and what's going to go in the commercial corridor, whether it's going to be high-density residential, mixed-use commercial, whether it's going to be parks or inserts for parking, or whatever it's going to be, then maybe the money is best spent in accomplishing those goals, if that's what it takes to improve the area.
Could be, and I think the issue is a matter of immediacy. It's going to take a while for that plan to unfold, get approved, get through GPAC. This is, something to do now. Yeah, I think that's
I'm not
it.
trying to take $50,000
Yeah.
away from Artesia
Right.
Boulevard.
No, I understand.
I'm just trying to say, I want to spend money
Yeah.
smart.
Right.
I want to work smarter, not harder.
Right. That's a fair point.
Isn't part of that $50,000 to kind of spruce up Artesia so it doesn't look like a ghetto right now? I mean, it's things like planters and lights in the planters and trees and things. That's not part of any of that $50,000.
It's a matching program for storefront and signage improvements. So
Okay.
it's basically
So that's-
allocating some city monies to incentivize private property owners and businesses to improve their own property.
So if you had,
So
if you
that's
had a s-
separate from the actual landscaping and the other work?
Yes,
that's separate.
that's a CIP project that we're executing as a city.
had Mel's Blockbuster Video sign.
I'd come and get my
And
50
now
grand from you.
Blockbuster Video, no one rents videos anymore, and you want to make it Mel's Audio Emporium, you could request this money and change your sign.
As an example. Or if you're going to do a major painting improvement or replace your storefront windows or canopy, I mean,
Some of the real estate offices did that.
they have, yeah, or are about to.
And again, counterpoint, I couldn't be more in favor of a fresh coat of paint and fixing up dilapidated signs to
100%.
brighten up the street a little bit.
100%.
So, way down from the 30,000-foot level, I've got to ask, on the Community Financing Authority, what is the Kincaid's pass-through?
It's a lease back arrangement. So we helped loan and construct that building. They pay it back through a lease process, and it's CFA's in part of it.
And how far out does that go? Because they've been there a long time.
Yeah, I'd have to go and look at the term. It's a few years still, but
I mean, they've been there more than 10 years, right? So,
yeah, they've been there probably 15 or more. Yeah. We can get you. I mean, we can ask our waterfront director to help provide that information later.
They have a separate contract.
Yeah.
okay. Thank you, and I want to thank everybody for obvious presentations.
For the pugilism.
Oh, we have some people probably
Yeah, so
want to speak.
before that, before we do any of that, I know, thank you for the honest, for being patient. One thing, Joe, do you want us to do the recommendations in item 9 or now for the budget for item number 6?
Now is probably more efficient. Yeah.
But yeah, before we do that, any more questions before we open it up to the audience?
I
Commissioner.
have one more question, and sorry to be late on this, but only because I picked on police earlier, and it didn't dawn on me, but in the category of things that look really, really strange, for the fire department, there is a special services organization that's composed of one division chief. And when I look at the budget, somehow his salary and benefits are in excess of $400,000, and maintenance and operations of whatever he does is another, well, for the current year, it's $70,000. It just seems strange. Just pointing it out.
That's not a question, that's an observation.
Yes.
Okay.
And I, without having the detail behind the personnel that are charged, I don't know if that's one person, two people, a share of a few people. We would have to.
The org chart says it's one.
That's one dedicated full-time equivalent. There might be other charges to that location from people that come into that service. We'd have to look at the detail.
So along those lines then, if any org chart, if it says one person that's full-time, but there still may be part-times behind it.
Yeah, you don't see in that org chart part-time charges, you don't see overtime charges, you don't see other allocations related to personnel that might be to that unit, but may not have a full-time person dedicated solely to the operation. So, I mean, that really gets into the part-time charges and the like are a single line item. They start to get into the weeds.
So given that statement, Mike, then wouldn't it be, I wouldn't say safe to say, but let's say high level, one department has 10 full-time, there may be 5 to 7 part-time, possibly?
Well, it's even less than that. I mean, or even potentially greater than that. You could go to the community services department, you might have 400 part-time, but they might only work 400 hours. So it just depends on the operation, the location. That's actually it's a dollar line item rather than an FTE line item for us.
Got it. Further questions, commissioners, before we open up to public comment?
One more question, please. One of the things that we discussed in our letter was personnel charges and pay increases. And in all of these packages by department, pay increase authorized by pay and benefits plan. Is that part of the MOU, or is that something that's discretionary?
MOU.
Okay, thank you. That was fast.
Further questions?
No.
At this time, I'd like to open up the questions to the audience. Any questions from the audience? Okay, we've got got 2, and we have 3 minutes. Rebecca James.
Good evening, Commissioners. Rebecca James, District 2. I have a very lengthy list of questions that were all raised by your fabulous questioning of the budget and finances of this city. But I know I won't have time for all of them. So I'm going to start with some that I think are particularly important. I would like to say about the Artesia improvements that I also am really in favor of that area being spruced up. I'm really in favor of economic development in our city in general. Something that I really never hear anything about. I never hear any report from our, I think it's Stephen Proud, who's in charge of economic development. So I would love for our city manager or someone from our city to at some point please report to us what this individual does that leads to actual economic development. Because I bet he does a great job, but no one knows because it's not reported. And in the meantime, our revenues continue to fall. And that is why I'm asking about economic development, because we have plans for spending out the wazoo, but we don't seem to have plans for how to get the revenue that we need to continue this spending. So I thank you so much if you can get that information and make that available to the citizens, as well as your own consideration. I couldn't agree more with Commissioner Solomon's comments about automation. I think we have a real dramatic paradigm shift coming in the way of automation. And we should embrace it as a city, and we should start embracing it now. We have all these vacancies, which actually when it was counted didn't turn out to be that many. But as we do, I noticed that we have several vacancies in payroll technician. And payroll is an area where automation is really up and running and it's a vibrant industry. And so we certainly can become more automated when it comes to payroll. So that would be a good place for us to test automation. Why are we paying retiree insurance costs? I know so many people that work for Fortune 500 companies that no longer have their retirement insurance costs covered in their as part of their retirement benefits. That's been completely discontinued. It's no longer available to them, and it's because of the cost to the company. We as a city have even more constraints than those profit-making, generators, and so I'm wondering, why are we continuing to pay retirement insurance costs? Maybe if we don't, we can encourage the state of California to take on universal single payer. I would also like to say that I'd love to see us eliminate all of that, 11 staff members that are working in the city attorney's office. I know that we have a lot of litigation. I know that there are needs, and I'm just about done here, but workers' compensation, I understand there's litigation associated with that, but we really need to start minimizing the amount of staff that we pay CalPERS for, and salaries. Thank you so much. Sorry to go over.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next, Jess Money.
Jess Money, District 3. I'm going to start with the overarching thing here, which is CalPERS. If you're not putting away the absolute maximum amount of money that you can for CalPERS, you're nuts. CalPERS is in the midst of a huge crisis. Their chief financial officer just left the company last week, or left the organization, after it was exposed a lot of resume fraud. The chief investment officer has announced he's leaving at the end of the year, but I don't think he's going to make it through the summer. Meantime, their return on investment last year from their private equity investments, which paid over $1 billion in fees, was less than they would have earned if they'd have simply invested the money in a Vanguard fund. Now, between 2012 and 2017, the number of California former employees in CalPERS alone collecting six-figure pensions went from 12,000 to 23,000. That alone is $2.8 billion, and it's the equivalent of the taxes of 1.6 million Californians. When you add in CalSTRS, the LAPD, the UC system, 53,000 people are collecting six-figure pensions from CalPERS. Now, here, the city attorney, you're telling me we have 11 employees and we have to hire outside counsel to help draft ordinances? Are you kidding me? This is insane. We don't need that many employees. We could have a whole lot less litigation if Joe Hefkin would stop conspiring with developers in the Chamber of Commerce to thwart the desires expressed by the voters at the polls. We wouldn't be suing people and we wouldn't be defending lawsuits, okay? The city attorney, Mike Webb, is an affable guy, but he's not a litigator. He's a paper shuffler. It's obvious that he's hired plenty of staff to do the actual work, and he gets paid a huge amount of money. This has got to stop. A recommendation has to be given to the council that prior to the next election for that office, that salary be reduced substantially and the staff costs reduced substantially. Staff positions, 11 people, geez. Angel Law beats us like stepchildren in court every time we go down there, and they got 4 people in the office. As far as cops and fire, LA County sheriffs would be a horrible idea. The last sheriff is awaiting sentencing. to go off to jail for violating federal laws. The sheriff's department's got plenty of problems. We'll keep the PD, but we should definitely go to LA County Fire and cut the head off all this bloated bureaucracy here. While we're at it, another recommendation, get rid of that cockamamie residential inspection program that was used to justify 2 superfluous employees in the fire department. Maybe the guy you're talking about that's costing us $500K a year can actually go out and do some work, all right?
Mr. Money, you've gone over 3 minutes. It's
Pardon?
almost 4 minutes. You have 3 minutes. It's
Well, the
over.
lights didn't go on.
Well, I've been measuring the time here.
Well, it would be nice if the speaker knew how much time he had left. That's the purpose of the lights. Anyway,
I'll give you 1 more minute.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Money. Any further public comment? Could you state your name, and could we also do the lights, please?
Yeah, my name's Rick Harbin. I'm in District 2, and I'd like to applaud Commissioner Samples for bringing up the fire department, and Mr. Bunny, of course, the same reason, the same problems with the fire department. It's costing us a ton of money. The fire chief here makes way more money than any other comparable city in the state of California, and that's ridiculous. But if you're talking about saving money, it seems like Commissioner Samples has found $400,000 we can get rid of. I also want to compliment you on questioning the police department's Air Force and their Navy. Now, I live down on the waterfront, and I see that police boat, and look, it's not like we have a whole international spy ring going in and out of Redondo Beach on our waterfront. We're talking about a little small area. So I don't know what the police boat does, except go up and down. They probably fish a little bit, troll, whatever they're doing, but they're not doing police work, fans. That's ridiculous. And if you really want to look and see what's going on the waterfront and you're concerned about it, the drones are much better. People see the police boat coming, they hide. Everybody knows, the police boat's coming, hey, whatever we're doing, we're going to stop doing it. Use the drones. But we can cut out a lot of money from that. The other thing I can say that you could save money on is our giant police ATV armored personnel carrier SWAT team. I have no idea what that machine does. We don't live in East Oakland, with all due respect to Oakland. We don't have SWAT attacks here, and we don't have active shooters going on in Redondo Beach. That machine is ridiculous. I have never seen it on the street. I have never seen it moved out of that parking lot. So you're talking about $200,000 worth of vehicle. That is just ridiculous. And the police, you know what? They have all these fancy SUVs they're driving around in. I'd put them in Priuses. There's no high-speed chases in Redondo Beach. And if they want to do a really good job, they ought to be watching out on, come down to Catalina at 5 o'clock and watch what goes on. It's like Indianapolis 500 qualifying down there. I never see the policeman down there ever. And when I asked the chief about it, he said, well, have you called it in? My job's not to call in people speeding. Your job is to be out on the road looking for it. So I think you have a lot of places you can cut the budget, but you need to cut this budget because it's going to crush Redondo, and that's not what we need here.
Thank you for those comments.
My name is Elizabeth Moorfield. I live in District 2. I am a library commissioner, but I'm here today speaking as an individual. You guys are facing a really, really tough decision. And unfortunately, I'm coming to ask you for money. Right now, the library's budget is $4.6 million. And out of that, $189,000 gets spent on books. Yes, $189,000. In the last 10 years, since the crisis, the maintenance and operation budget, not adjusted for inflation for the library, has been cut by 25%. The city manager came to our meeting and requested that the library find ways to raise revenues. Last year, the library put in $100,000 in various fines and room rates into the general fund. And there's a decision package to give us back 40,000 of it. Right now, we are operating with 4 less people than the crisis level. The North Branch Library has never returned to its pre-crisis level hours, opening hours. In order to get the library into a healthy condition, because what has happened is in order to keep the meeting rooms going and the different community programs going, librarian staff is working on those events and not on the collection. We need a dedicated full-time librarian for the North Branch. We need the budget return to the pre-crisis level. $100,000 and one person will enable the library to make an incredible difference. Because think about it, that one fireman, that's bigger than the entire operating budget for the library. So as you peel down the layers of this onion, out of $4.6 million, $189,000 is going into books. To be fair, an additional $100,000 is going into digital. And with that combined $289,000, you have served almost 500,000 patrons. There have been 500,000 checkouts of library material. It's bang for your buck. Do the math. So please, as you're coming into where you have to cut, don't include the library. We haven't recovered from the last go-round. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your comments. Commissioners? Shall we make a recommendation for the budget? I think already, let me just review some of my notes here. We discussed about 3 departments, fire, police, and the city attorney, perhaps getting a little bit more finer details, explanation of their budget. I'm just going high level for now. We would like to see down the road, not necessarily this year, but a future 3 to 5 year budget. We would also like a better understanding of the variances in the budgets. And then there were some comments regarding the Artesia corridor, that $50,000, Mr. Solomon. How would you like to say that?
I think it would be to consider whether or not that $50,000 encumbrance should be made at this time or held off right now. Not that it would be a limit, that we wouldn't spend that money and invest in our corridors, but whether or not it's wise to make that $50,000 allocation at this time.
That sounds reasonable.
Is there a way to put something like that in the budget and like put it in suspense or pending or something like that? Or once it's in the budget, it's spendable money?
Well, once it's in the budget with a specific purpose, then it's available for expenditure. But however, the storefront improvement programs each require separate grants. I mean, there's separate follow-up action on the part of the city council. So I don't know how you would, I mean, it sounds like it would, really what you're saying is sort of your recommendation would be to hold off on the $50,000 for now, is what it sounds like you're saying on the storefront program.
Well, like suspend approvals then for at least till
No,
mid-year?
well,
or-
there, I don't want to speak out of turn, but there was a $100,000 allocation.
Right.
The response was that that's almost all been.
Yeah, that's in motion.
Yeah.
So what, at this point, absent any new funding, we wouldn't call for any more potential projects. We'd spend the 100 and we'd stop.
Yeah, my
Until there's new funding.
recommendation would be that we would put it for the next go-round, maybe consider it again for 1920, or in conjunction with a report from the group that's reviewing the Artesia corridor, and the consultant that we hired for the Artesia corridor, and the GPAC. I can understand that there'd be a difference of opinion on it, but my suggestion would be, or idea would be, that we would hold off on it until 1920.
Yeah. If I may, an alternative suggestion might be to go ahead and, allocate the funds or approve the funds, but not to approve any additional grants until there's a follow-up report to assess the effectiveness of how the $100,000 was spent.
I'd be okay with that.
That sounds fine.
Thank you.
What about the recommendation of matching the increase in the core budget with just the increase in revenue? 1.9 million was the increase in revenue, and finding a top line, finding some reductions there to meet the, because the core budget was going up, expenses 2.2 million, and the revenues are going up 1.9 million.
I guess the question is more so, how do we get a tighter budget in terms of finding expenses, reducing expenses for increased costs?
Yeah, and
Or flat revenue?
and really what that touches on, I pulled up the kind of the responsibilities or the scope of authority of the Budget and Finance Commission, and I think, Ms. Esser, really what you're touching on is one of the powers and duties of the Budget and Finance Commission, which is to maintain I'm just going to read you a couple sentences, maintain a continuous study of sources of municipal revenue and methods of proper spending of public monies, assist the city manager and council in the financial planning and recommended methods of obtaining and financing permanent public improvements in the city, as from time to time may be suggested by the city manager and city council. So it almost sounds like that's something to work towards, to achieve over time. The idea that the commission is going to recommend that we cut $300,000 or $350,000, whatever it is, out of the budget without studies, without analysis, without specifics, I don't really see that as really being achievable over the course of the next month, but it is something that over the course of time, if we could identify specific things that you'd like to see studied, evaluated, analyzed in order to achieve some additional savings.
Okay, I think that's along the variances that we talked about in the review. So let me just repeat it again. A lot of notes here. First one, recommendation again is to review the fire, police department, city attorney, offices or departments regarding their actual budgets, the mid-year.
Versus actual cost, yeah.
Versus actual costs, essentially just reviewing their budgets in a finer detail.
And just to be clear on that, you may see the actual projection change between now and our next report, our next meeting on the 14th. So don't be surprised if that's the case, because what we're going to be doing is going back to each of those budget analysts in those departments and saying, okay, how did you make this projection and why? And we're going to be getting very granular as to what that number includes, so we can get you that detail. So just fair warning, that
what
will
we're
be our
looking
next
for.
step. Yeah,
That's exactly what we're looking
yeah.
for. Okay. Second one is more down the future, looking at 3 to 5 year budget forecasting.
For, top line revenue and.
Top line and bottom line.
Expense, yeah.
Yeah.
General fund revenue expense.
And then item number 3, to look at all the variances within the budget, just overall. It seems like it comes during mid-year, with budget responses. There seems to be a lot of variances. I understand that budgets have to be adjusted, but just a better feel for the variances, just understanding it.
If we're talking about, if we're going to entertain out year, you know, maybe not recommendations just for this budget cycle, but out year, in line with the top line revenue and expense forecast, it would be very helpful if while we're in this proposal budget review cycle, that we have those CalPERS projections for the pension and the workers' comp projections while we're reviewing this budget.
Sure.
So in line with that.
Yeah, and you'll receive the budget response report
Yeah, I
for CalPERS.
understand.
You'll have that for the next meeting.
Understand, but it just would be great if we could have that when this is first out, you know, while we're looking at it.
Well, what we do in the fall is we provide a copy of the circular we receive for PERS.
Did get the, yeah, so basically, I was looking at the numbers that we got from the mid-year
Right.
response report, so.
That's really the most, that's the
really
most up-to-date information we have.
So if we look at that
Yeah.
while we're looking at this,
Yeah.
you couldn't give us anything
No.
better than that?
No, there's no more to give in that regard. We will get the next update in the fall, and that will give
Oh,
us
okay.
the next out-year projection.
All right, thank you.
If I may, well, go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Along the lines of projections, or what we're considering, would be the idea of how we can use innovation, automation, checking with our department heads to see where we can automate to mitigate our personnel costs, which would then further mitigate our CalPERS exposure
Sure.
and our work comp exposures.
Right. Yeah, automation savings, absolutely.
And I have some ideas I can forward to you
That'd be great.
all that I've already done some research on.
Be great.
And I had a question on the variances, more than we provided with your report this time?
I don't know if it's about more than the report, but it just, what's the sense? It always seems there's always a lot of variances. Not that it's not needed, but, you know, just try to be more on target.
Well, maybe what we do is, because we didn't really go department by department, maybe we bring that information back again at your next meeting, and we can drill down a little further, not just in police, fire, and city attorney, but all the departments.
Yeah, maybe what would be helpful is maybe some of the high-level points of the big dollar amounts or big percentages, why did those occur, rather than trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think what you're going to find, I mean, the revenue projections on the whole, I mean, you recall mid-year, bottom line figures are pretty good, I mean, on the aggregate. What you're going to see is line by line, you're going to see there's going to be some movement there. There just is. And the nature of a complex operating department budget, you're going to see some unique things occur. But if you're talking specifically about city attorney's office, fire department, police department, we can explain to you what's happening, particularly in those personnel categories, and we can touch on that particular division, Commissioner Samples, that you were concerned about, the expenses. We can get you some more detail there. You know, infinite detail as to each of the tweaks in these budgets that's a lot of material. I mean, I don't know how deeply you want to get into. I think the targeted department review in those particular categories helps us really get you something meaningful. If we go variances in all forms, we're going to be burying you in paper, and I'm not sure it's going to be worth your time.
They're also reviewing all the city employee unions are all in negotiations right now.
Yeah, I mean, as long as I think we really need to concentrate on understanding the overtime that we're spending versus filling the positions, you know. And I'm sure that detailed analysis with the police, and that's really with the police and the fire.
So a study between what it is in overhead and expense for a full-time position versus the number of hours we're expending on overtime.
Yeah, the overtime, and to really understand if we have some costs, you know, where we can make
Usually
better
that's in
efficiencies.
public safety.
Yeah, it is it's the fire department and the police. But one other item that I have here, but I didn't know whether we should discuss it tonight or not, but if we're talking about recommendations for the future, I really think that, you know, it's been brought up a couple times here, we've brought it all up, is that there is some very specific staff positions that are very highly compensated in comparison with other cities and you know, in the private sector. You know, if you just look at you know, Redondo's got about 26 positions making over, you know, total, this is total compensation, okay, of over 300,000, between 300,000 and over 400,000 each and there's about 26 of those that are in that very high category. I really think that we should look at a study of these very specific high compensation positions and see if there's some salary adjustments or something that we can look at with that. I don't know, you know.
Are those people who are outside of the public safety?
Yes, there's public safety and there's people and there's administration. Yeah.
Most of them are public safety.
Yeah, half are public. Yeah, about half are. You know, you're talking about the city attorney. You're talking about. Yeah, you know, I mean, the city manager, the IT director, chief of police, fire division chief, deputy harbor master, chief fire captains, assistant city attorneys. Yeah, I mean, so it's a combination, but, you know, if I were to say about half of them are fire related.
I think the
Okay.
biggest question is, for those salary levels, traditional responsibility levels based on their title, is the city getting its money's worth? Okay, the example that I brought out is a position that in most fire departments is a captain at the most. Sometimes it's a battalion chief. We've got it as a division chief. We have no battalion chiefs in our department, but we've got 3 division chiefs, and 2 of the division chiefs supervise less than 5 people. For somebody to be receiving compensation that's well into 6 figures and have supervisory span of control of 1 person or 5 people is a little crazy.
Just, I think out of fairness, they do rotate those assignments. Those aren't permanent placements. The division chiefs rotate between the different units over the course of a few years.
The question is the city getting its money's worth for that position? Is that really the right level
For those-
what that person is doing?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there is very specific titles that we are paying a lot more than, you know, what you're seeing in other cities. I mean, you know, all of these are getting paid well more than the private sector. I mean, that's not even to say, but, you know, I'm just saying that, you know, also with the public sector, which is usually quite high in comparison to private sector salaries.
So essentially, Commissioner Esser is just concerns regarding senior staff positions and their high compensation.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't even say, yeah, I mean, you could say senior staff. I would just say that we should be reviewing highly compensated staff positions.
Well, that's how Manhattan Beach saved $700,000.
Yeah.
They cut 2 management positions with their automation.
Right.
But that's also why I asked the question about specialty teams, whether it's police or fire, or gosh, I don't know, maybe there's someone in Public Works that has a special team that they operate. But police and fire, things like SWAT team members generally have higher than average competition or compensation for their actual position levels. So a police officer makes X, a police officer on the SWAT team makes X plus a SWAT team bonus.
Right.
And that rolls into workers' comp. They also tend to be the ones that get hurt more often because they're in training incidents that are higher intensity training incidents. It means that there's more overtime, there's more training. Instead of them being on the street doing patrol duty, they're off training, learning how to be SWAT officers. That's why I brought up these specialty positions, and I think we need to examine what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the chief will provide you good answers. My guess is that our SWAT training is probably not as frequent as it might seem, but the chief will be able to give you some information
If it's
on
a
that.
SWAT team, there's a DOJ mandate.
Yeah, there's going to be some minimums. I think from what what I can glean, it's
So I'd like to
Not terribly
consider,
active.
two other things, Mr. Chair. One is, I'd like for there to be, it ties into some of what we were discussing, recognizing the sensitive nature of it, an internal audit of our usage of outside counsel. And the example that I will give is that the city attorney took, and there were two staff people from the city, along with outside counsel, that went to a emergency meeting in Lawndale. And I don't know if they went over there to speak. I don't know if they went over there for, just to see what was happening, revolving around an appeal to the Galleria. And we paid outside counsel to attend that meeting. That seems superfluous. So just as an example, I'd like to know if there's a way of, we can have an internal audit of our usage of outside counsel, when it's triggered, if there's a process that they go through, and then afterwards, whether or not it was a proper allocation of that resource. And the second thing would be.
Before that, I think it would probably be better to have that department discuss their overall policies first before we just go directly to that.
About the philosophy of use of outside counsel?
Yeah, and then we can ask that question when they're here.
What he's saying, when we review those,
Yeah.
that department's getting reviewed,
Okay,
you know, more
that's fair.
detailed.
The second thing is if there's a way that we can get the library their money. I don't know, it's really tight, I know there's a lot going on, but I agree with Ms. Moorfield in that that is a very important resource, the library, to the city. It gets a lot of use by the residents. It takes a beating in internal service charges for things that just because that's the way it is. And if we can aid that resource, I'd really like to see if we can do that.
So what was that again, Commissioner?
If we can find, there is a $40,000 allocation to the library right now. If there's a way of finding that extra $60,000 to get them their 100.
We talked about some of that at the last meeting or a couple of meetings back. Things like their ISF fund or their charges
I
in the
understand,
ISF fund
yeah.
include things like paying for the parking structure that everyone else in the city uses. So.
Right, I'm just saying, for right now, if there's a way to find a way in a very tight budget
Yeah.
to, I think it's worth what Betsy said is, Ms. Moorfield said is very well taken. It's a resource that a lot of our residents use, and it's maybe getting the cold shoulder.
No, when she was speaking, she was talking about 100, they need 100K and an additional staff member, or what was the 100K? I mean,
It was a hope for an additional staff member, but if there's a way of bumping up that $40,000 to $100,000
Okay,
is
the
what I'm asking
40,000
for.
is being, and the money's going to be used for more books
More
and
books,
things, yeah,
right.
things like that, okay.
That's what's in the proposed budget right now, is
Yeah.
an additional
Okay.
40,000 to supplement the existing core budget.
Okay, thank you.
And she kind of pointed out that they're moving to automation, and if you haven't tried the new automated book checkout system in the library, it's pretty impressive.
So what's your recommendation, Commissioner Solomon?
Recommendation is if we can find the $60,000 in the budget to get the library $100,000 for resources.
Staff, any comments on that?
Well, I'm hearing a couple of different things. On one hand, I'm hearing don't spend more than your revenues allow you to spend each year. And I'm hearing this comment that separate and apart from that, find an extra $60,000. So those two things are somewhat inconsistent. The other thing is you may wish to invite the library director in and have sort of a more sort of holistic overview of the library department's budget to understand everything that's in the budget. We did do a mini financial statement that's on page 41 of your budget, so you can see the revenues that are brought in right now by the library, and you can see the expenditures. So, I mean, that's the other thing I could offer if Susan's available, to have her come in as the director, as the subject matter expert to address you.
Thank you, Joe. I would agree that it'd be very worthwhile to have the library director come in and address that issue. I don't believe, the reason I disagree with the second part of it about it being inconsistent is that what we're talking about now is making choices about how to spend money. So I'm not saying that we're going to spend an additional $60,000. What I'm talking about is if we can find a different place in the budget that may not need that 60,000 as an urgency, but making choices, which is what government does.
And I'm hearing an augmentation of the $40,000 one-time expense, not a core ongoing
Correct.
$60,000 augmentation.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
That's an important distinction.
Just as a way of amplifying what I'm saying.
I mean, I think the other thing too is we don't necessarily want to cherry pick on certain departments or single line items, you know, whether it's police, whether it's library, whether it's, you know, city clerk's office, treasurer's office, and then, I mean, then we won't be necessarily, I mean, essentially then we'd be a manager for that particular section, right?
Let's get our 2 and 20.
Right, and we want staff to do their jobs properly, and we make sure that we have input. I think if library is a concern, I think then we should have that instead on down the road. We have fire, we have police, we have city attorney, then we can have a discussion on the library.
Well, just to be clear, I don't know if we're going to have all four of them
I
here
don't
for the 14th.
No, that was not the intention.
Okay.
Let's put that first.
And just to be extra clear, we can't, while Joe can ask the police chief, the fire chief, the library director to pretty much be here whenever he would like them to be here, we're not going to be able to ask the same of Mr. Webb. That's going to be a request that we can pass along. We'll have to figure out if he's, one, willing, and two, when he's available to be present before you.
Right, I think the idea is more so just to get a better idea of the budget for those 3 departments plus the library from a high-level perspective, get a little bit more finer details. At a future meeting, you know, we will have one of the 4 of these departments discuss with us regarding their budget. You know, whether it's this year or, let's just put it on the calendar for the next 12 months.
I think if we get the numbers for the next meeting, like you say, the detailed numbers.
Yeah, that would be
and then,
helpful.
you know, and then, because we're going to need time to review those anyway, to formulate our questions, and then have them come at a future meeting, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't think it would be prudent to have them, you know, standing before us prior to us getting, you know, a review of the detailed numbers, you know.
We can certainly get you that. I guess the question would be, to Commissioner Sample's questions, I think it might be helpful if the police chief were to sort of explain how staffing works and the like, because I think those are questions, that deployment question, I think he can answer on the cuff. So, I mean, we'll certainly help him understand what
Yeah, I
you're.
think the police, no, you're right. We had the questions here, you know, specific to the police operations that, yes,
That might be helpful for your
Yes.
consideration as part of all this.
Yes.
In terms of giving you the supplemental information and at the more granular level for those departments, I think we can commit to getting you more detail on the variances for the personnel increases that you cited and helping you explain and understand that. If we're talking about kind of a department breakdown at all line item level and kind of a categorical.
I think we should just concentrate on the personnel.
Right.
Line. I mean,
That's
I
kinda-
don't know, yeah, if that's okay. I mean, because that's really where the costs are anyway. I mean, that's what-
Yeah, I think we could probably come back maybe down the road, maybe if we're having one-on-ones with departments that can help them, they can explain you to their budgets, and maybe you get into that then, but maybe we stay focused on the variance side on the personnel
Yes.
for the meeting on the 14th.
Yeah, and specifically, you know, understanding overtime versus the vacant positions.
Sure.
Costs, you know, analysis with that, yeah.
And one thing that, just to, as a foreshadowing, as it relates to overtime, some of those overtime issues are in part, it's not always at the discretion of the chiefs to assign overtime. There are mandates in our MOUs that dictate some of the terms by which that overtime is accrued. So,
It's being negotiated right now.
right. So it's not just a budget discussion. There's also a labor association.
Yeah, it would be, yeah, if we could understand what is the mandatory versus the discretionary part of it, you know.
Well,
that
they're
would be-
figuring that out right now.
Okay, well, just based on history, I mean, we're looking at we're looking
Historical
at
averages,
that,
okay.
yeah.
Well, there's some of it with the fire department. It's like in order to have a fire truck on the road, you have to have X number of personnel on that fire truck.
Mandated,
So,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
there's
there's-
not a lot of wiggle room in that. If
Yeah,
somebody
minimum
doesn't show up for
staffing.
work,
Right, minimum staffing and minimum staffing is both an MOU-related issue as well as a basic safety issue for our employees as well, so.
And out of respect for, we're talking particularly the police chief, the fire chief, and the city attorney's office. Out of respect for their time and our time, rather than trying to get each of them down here and have them do presentations or do Q&As or anything, does it make more sense for us to put together a subcommittee and simply go and interview them and then report back to our commission next month? Because I think we know what we're looking for.
I think, you know, a counterpoint on that is that I think we each would like to hear the presentations
Okay.
rather than a report back. I would.
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, we should just go with the high-level questions or recommendations to staff. I mean, down the road, I think definitely it would be a good idea to have each department present to us, whether one of them next week. So let me just review this again, and let's try to wrap this up.
If I could, real quick, Chair, just to that point, if there's interest by each of you individually to know more about a particular department, I mean, just like we've had one-on-ones with a few of you as staff, don't hesitate to reach out and query our chiefs. They'll take your call. They'll answer any questions you might have. It doesn't have to be a formal subcommittee. I mean, if you reach out to them and ask questions, they'll respond. They'll talk to you, and they'll help you understand, you know, how they operate.
So I think in, you know, the interest of understanding the overall operations, and that we're not going to have a discussion with the chief of police and tell them to cut a person. You know, this is in the very long-term
Understanding, right.
feel of this commission, regardless of who sits on it 2 years from now. We're going to have significant budget challenges in the next year, for the next 5 years, and there obviously is an increased level of oversight by this commission to what there was 2 or 3 years ago. It's just the beginning, phase one of starting to understand, so we can make educated recommendations, or at least observations, or at least illuminations of what it means to look at a line item here and point to say what it is, rather than we draw conclusions. So it is the first baby step towards a broader look by this commission, is one way of looking at it.
Okay, so let me try to sum it up again for the referral from the Budget and Finance. Number one, for better understanding of the variances in the, well, there's a number of things, right? Understanding their budget, the variances, and the personnel regarding fire, police, city attorney, and library. Item number two, for a future 3 to 5 year budget. And I'm going to change this one. Item number three,
Or a 3 to 5 year forecast.
forecast,
Yeah.
correct, sorry,
As part of
forecast,
the
yeah.
future budget.
That'd be scary.
Item number three, review innovation and automation as a ways of reducing costs and improving efficiency.
And that's more of an ongoing request, right? Not
Yeah.
a Jan 14.
Yeah, ongoing.
Yeah, or July 14, June 14.
Yeah. And then item number four, regarding the Artesia corridor, I think you mentioned it, Joe, maybe if you can just repeat that.
Sure.
What would you?
It was to, if it's funded as part of next year's budget, to hold off on any additional improvements until there's a report on the effectiveness on the first $100,000 that was spent. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah.
All right, got 4 down. Item number 5, review highly compensated employees.
Internal audit, was that the word? I mean,
Highly
that's-
compensate, yeah, staff positions or employee, yeah.
Yeah, and that's more of an ongoing
Right.
kind of analysis, right? An oversight issue. And
Yeah, I mean, just review, and, you know, and ensure that it's in line with, you know, other,
comparable agencies,
yeah.
right? And, you know, specifically, when you evaluate the clerk and city attorney positions as part of your, that's the type of the information you look at when you do that, at least for those two. The other positions would be different, but.
And if I may, just to add on to that, typically, if that were to be an in-house study, it would be the highly compensated staff members that would be doing that study, which I don't think is your intention.
Well, you
No.
wouldn't fib on the numbers, would you?
Everybody in this room?
So that may be something that you want to recommend to the council
Yeah.
to have an independent study done,
Yeah, and
a
that's what,
class
that's
comp
basically what I
study.
was looking at.
An affordable independent study
Yeah, affordable is right, yeah,
on comps.
yes.
Maybe more accounting related.
Well, my impression of our conversation wasn't to
Who could tell us they-
directly study the compensation of, or the comp plans and benefits of those highly compensated people. It's, do we have the right people in, the people that we have in particular positions? Are they, is their compensation, their title, their responsibility, are all of those consistent? So I think that was
that's something-
more where
Yeah, and
we were
I'm
going.
not sure that's the Budget and Finance Commission's charge to, are the right people assigned to do the jobs? That's sort of more, the city council has one employee, and that's yours truly, and then I appoint the department heads. The department heads appoint their staff. So of everything you've said, I think that one sort of is outside of really what your scope should be.
Okay.
And then I got, I'm not too sure how to word this one regarding the library, just review of the library budget. I mean, that was kind of on, that's kind of on the very first point, so,
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to get too granular on
yeah.
being directive on that.
Well, there was the
So
request
that's 6
for-
items?
Well, I think there was the request for $60,000 augmentation to the one-time budget recommendation. That was the other item.
Would we want that on there?
I think we were feeling that was a little bit directive and granular and managing for them. Was that your point?
I think that was Warren's point, right?
Well, I think my point was it's better to go from the top level rather than the bottom level.
I mean, if we're looking at a $100 million budget, are we going to make one recommendation for $60,000? Although we all support the library, so.
Well, let's have them review it and see if there's some money to augment their budget. Maybe look at it that way. Instead of a specific number, if there's a way to revisit the library's charges and budget.
Okay, that's fine. I think we could put on item number 7, review the,
Library's budget and expenses.
that's a better way to
And
put it.
another way to put it is there was a comment from a member of the public that said perhaps there was a funding need, and does the management of the library agree with that, and et cetera.
I think that's fair. Everyone's okay with that?
I would just put down just the review of the budget of the library.
We won't ask you to go through it one more time. That's enough.
It'll get worse?
All right,
I think the essence of it has been conveyed.
Did you also have the structural balance I had in my notes?
I think that was going to be an
For
ongoing effort.
ongoing,
Yeah,
yes.
ongoing effort, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right. Look at, on an ongoing.
Ongoing
on the
revenues.
future, future recommendations to, that we recommend that the staff match the expense increase with the revenue increase in the out,
okay.
yeah.
So that's number 7. Or, yeah, number 8. what's that, number 5?
So we're making that as, this is a motion along with the receive and file?
Yeah, so that's,
7 items with a motion to receive
Yeah.
and file.
so do I have a motion to receive and file?
Make a motion to adopt the 7 recommendations and receive and file the budget and finance, proposed 2018-2019 city budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. There's none. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we get to say thank you.
Item number 7.
Treasurer's report.
If I may be so bold to make a recommendation that we have a briefing at the high level of, Fed is raising rates next week, and,
They're at the 10 years already at 3%. Thanks for sticking around for us, Neil.
stick to the top couple points. We're on track. We're at X%, and our money's safe.
Sure. So Neelish Mehta, Deputy City Treasurer. Just going to go over some quick PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go over the investment reporting guidelines, quarterly performance, historical comparison, sector allocation, policy compliance, and trading activity. As you can see from this chart, safety, liquidity, and yield. And that's the order that we do our investment decision. We make our investment decisions on. So,
Yep, we've seen those before.
Yep.
seen it before, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, this is a new chart. It's been about 10 years, but now the 2-year T-note yield is higher than the S&P 500's dividend yield. So as you can see in the top chart, it's a little blurry. We are headed at a time when the rate spread is negative. So it's something to think about. 10-year T-note yield is heading towards a 10-year high, and the 2-year T-note yield, percentage yield, is also in the same situation. Next chart just shows a chart going back to 1980. Basically compares the global financial crisis that happened in 2007, and as you can see currently, the red circle, we're approaching that level. And so the question is, will the 10-year T-note yield continue breaking its long-term resistance, or is another crash crisis lurking? Just a quick third quarter analysis on the investments that we have, along with the yields. I broke it down here to make it a little bit easier to read. Our general fund balance, just under $4 million. We have a LAIF balance of $6 million, which was $12 million previously, and we reallocated the funds into other sectors. Commercial paper has had an increase to just about $6 million due to the higher returns, and treasuries just under $12 million. So our total investment portfolio is $88 million. The rate of return for the third quarter is 1.41%. As you can see, the LAIF yield has increased tremendously. We're at 1.5%. So that's a significant increase from the past quarters. Year to date, we have interest earned of just over $900,000, and from that, 2/3 of it goes into the general fund, just under $600,000. This is just a comparison chart of the 2016-17 numbers, and a year ago from this point, we had a LAIF yield of 0.79, so significantly improved, and the interest earned was $680,000, so we are already at $900,000, so the higher returns are reflected. This is a sector allocation based on diversification. Agency funds, 53%, Treasury, 13%, CDs, just under 3%, commercial paper, we're up to 7%, almost 7%, LAIF, 7%, and corporate, 17%. This is a chart of our laddered portfolio. We have just under 40% of our portfolio invested in 0 to 1 year investments. As you can see from this chart, our book yield has shown an increase. We're at 1.6% month end. Historical book values, as you can see from this chart, there was a dip. That dip was due to an $8 million decrease into CalPERS. And the remaining dip is just a normal cash flow that happens throughout the year. This is a policy compliance chart. I made it a little bigger on this. Weighted average maturity needs to be between 1.5 years and 2.5 years. We're currently at 1.72 years, so we're in compliance. Liquidity, less than 1 year. At least 25% of the portfolio should have that, and we're at almost 40%. So we are in compliance with all of our investment policy guidelines. Trading activity for the quarter, we had 7 purchases and we had 8 redemptions. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
One question, just one question. On the last page of the report, it had, that we were sent, it talked about, yeah, if you could just explain the, this page, Niels?
Which way?
Just the very last page. Just explain what's the difference between affiliate, trade, and investment management. So I believe the $1,500 is investment management fees?
Yes, $1,500 a month. That goes to FTN investments.
Yep. And then if you can explain what's affiliate, trade, and then the credit debit column.
Okay, so if they place a trade using an FTN product, then they issue us a credit. However, in the last, I believe, quarter, there was no trade credit. So we had to pay the full $4,500.
So just let's do an example then. So for the 5th line item, Freddie Mac, 1%, 2021, $2 million trade. Affiliate trade, 2,000, what's that? And then what's the 40? So they give you a credit of 45, 35?
Are you talking about on March 30th of 2016?
Yeah, so explain that to us.
Yeah, so they issued a trade credit. So the $1,500 that we owe them on a monthly basis would be credited if they were to purchase a product through FTN, because they are not allowed to earn a commission on their own investment type.
Okay, so what's the $2,000 right there on that line?
That is the amount of the trade credit that we got for them making the trade for the $2 million. Okay. So the second to the last column is the amount that we would have owed them. So on a quarterly basis, it's $4,500. So as you can see from 126, 129, and 131, of those 3 at the top, we didn't pay them the $4,500.
Okay. All right. Questions, commissioners? Questions from the audience? Thank you, Niels.
Motion to receive and file treasurer's report.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None opposed? One more motion.
Oh, we have to ask for referrals.
Number 9, member items and referrals to staff for budget and finance.
None.
None, because we already gave one on the
For the budget.
item number 6.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. Aye. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.